everyone, and welcome to another full-length podcast of Lash to the Mast. This is our fifth episode. I don't really have any announcements, so I think we can just jump straight into the content here. So beginning with philosophy, as we always do, we're going to review the last podcast, and then we're going to do a deeper dive into hylomorphism as well as into form and matter. So if you want to see more than this just abridged version, then please check out the philosophy number 4 video, which should explain it in a little more depth. All right, so in discussing hylomorphism, which again is the name for the union between form and matter, we considered an example of ink written on a dry erase board. And I actually have a dry erase board over there, so it's kind of, an inspiration for this idea. The ink which exists inside a pen before being put on the board, namely wet ink, takes on another form upon drying, namely dry ink. We also saw that this dry ink takes on yet another form when it is brushed off the board, namely ink particles. Now Fazer, this is a philosopher, Ed Fazer, that is commenting on this, and who I'm pulling a lot of this, a lot of my philosophical content from. Fazer argues that there is a determinable substratum underlying all of these different things, different changes called matter. All right, so we're going to slow down, take this bit by bit. I know these can seem like really large words, but if we break it down, then we should be able to understand what's going on here. So don't panic. Don't leave the episode right now because you think philosophy's way over your head. It's not. Philosophy can be for everyone. So pull yourselves together, and we're gonna see what Fazer just said. So, determinable substratum. What does that mean? Well, determinable substratum here just means that there is ink that exists in one form or another throughout all of the three phases. Remember the wet ink, the dry ink, and then the particles of ink. There's the matter underlying all of those is the same. Even though we might not necessarily call the particles of ink, ink particles like ink, it's still the same matter that was brushed off the dry erase board. So just to say that again, determinable substratum here just means that there is that the ink exists in one form or another throughout all three of those phases, the wet ink, dry ink, and ink particles. All right, well, what about determinable? Well, determinable means that this constant thing, this matter that undergirds all three of these phases, like we just looked at, can be modified in certain specific ways. So, the substratum, which again is the matter underlying each of these three phases that the ink goes through. So the substratum underlying the wet ink, the dry ink, and the ink particles is what persists in each of these three phases. Okay, what about the thing that is doing the determining? The thing doing the determining of the substratum, kind of molding this matter into something, into a real thing. The thing doing the determining of the substratum is what causes the wet ink to be wet, the dry ink to be dry, and the ink particles to be particles. The substratum underlying this form is called matter, while the thing doing the determining is called form. So you can have the substratum of like ink or whatever. Pick your favorite example, a substratum of ink, and the matter tells us we can discern that there's the same matter there, but it's this concept of form that determines the matter that allows us to tell whether it's wet or dry or in particles. So that this is almost exactly like act and potency. Potency is a capacity for existence, and here this substratum is also a capacity for existence, and then you have act modifying potency and bringing that potency into being. And then here you have form, which is associated with the actual existence of the thing. I think I jumped the gun a little bit there, so yeah, we should be going over some of that in just a sec. All right, so this may seem kind of confusing, but if we think of, oh, hey, there we go. If we think of matter and form as special cases of potency and act, we can clear things up a little bit. Hey, we were great minds, think alike. Um, so, as I just said, matter is a subset of potency, while form is a subset of act. So, as Phaser puts it much more clearly than I just did, beginning quote, matter is essentially that which needs actualizing in change. Form is essentially that which results from the actualization. Um, so, the form is so in the wet ink example, like the form would be the thing making it the thing making the ink, the matter of ink exist in a in a wet state. So it's the thing that causes wet ink to exist rather than say dry ink or ink particles. And if this wet ink dries on the dry erase board, then you can say there's another form there which is determining that ink to be dry rather than wet, and so on, for the ink particles. Um, so for this reason, then, form can exist without matter, just like act can exist without potency, while matter can exist without form, just like potency can exist without act. So yeah, and in fact, form and matter are literally just subsets of act and potency. So almost everything we said concerning act and potency also applies to matter and form. So um, oh, excuse me. So that was the review of the last episode. If you want a more in-depth version of that, then please check that one out. Or yeah, if you're still confused on act and potency, then maybe check out some of the first few videos as well, because these concepts kind of build on each other. So it's good to take your time and make sure you really understand what's going on before, rushing along. Like maybe this pace is too fast for you, maybe it's too slow, but I am trying to just give you guys the time that um, you need to be successful in mastering this content. So, all right. So with that, we'll start the current episode um, by examining matter and form in terms of substances. So remember what we just mentioned. Matter can't exist without form, um, which is why it is possible for things to exist that are pure forms or a mixture of form and matter, but not pure matter. So this is exactly like the act and potency. Remember, pure act can exist. You can have an act and potency exist at the same time, or you can have nothing not being, which is really just nothingness. Here it's you can have pure form. You can also have matter mixed with form, and then matter by itself just doesn't exist. Um, if it's isolated from any form whatsoever. Uh, so so this matter that if in theory if we could um, take all form away from matter and just consider matter on its own, this is what is called prime matter. And then in turn, matter mixed with some existing form is called secondary matter. Um, so that would be like pretty much everything we see in the physical world today. Um, okay, so to go along with these two types of matter and form, um, to go on with these two types of matter, prime matter and secondary matter, there are two types of forms, substantial form and accidental form. All right, let's start with the substantial form. What is a substantial form? A substantial form is that which causes something to exist, i.e., separates a thing from nothingness. So, as Phaser puts it, Substances in general just are the sorts of things which exist in themselves rather than inhering in anything else, and which are the subjects of the attributes which do of their nature inhere in something else. So is really a fancy kind of fancy way to put it, but um, basically what Phaser is saying here is that um, a substantial form is a form that exists without reference to any other form. Like it's um, or even matter. I think no, not matter, but when considered in in and of itself, substantial form is that which determines what it is, what a thing is. Like it determines what a thing is, um, and the way in which it exists. So like matter can't exist without a substantial form, but a substantial form can exist with matter. But in the but sorry, I'm kind of rambling on here, but just to re-emphasize this, so matter can't exist without substantial form. Um, Substantial form can exist without matter, or it can exist with some sort of matter um, that it can modify. Okay, so in terms of accidental forms, then, these are forms which do not exist in themselves, but modify some already existing substantial form, such as the hair or skin color of humans. So if you think about the substance of humans, like that would be humanity, like whatever that means on a metaphysical level. But you know, being human doesn't like there's many different iterations of that substance. Humanness, humanity, no, sorry, humanness. Um, and so things like hair color and skin color are not like are not part of the substantial form, because they're really incidental to the what a human is. Like there are people who have dark skin and there are people who have light skin, and that there's still the same substance being manifested in each of the two. Um, if you take like uh, a dog, like a golden retriever with like someone with blonde hair, like yeah, they have the same hair color, but obviously not the same substance. So that's what this idea of accidental form is trying to get at, is that hair color, skin color, or not color in general, um, and yeah, just all of these different things are accidental forms modifying the substantial form, and they don't exist in and of themselves. So if the substantial form were to go out of existence, for example, then all the accidental forms would kind of collapse with it. um, all right, let's see. All right, there's another quote here from Ed Fazer, so I'm just going to read this. Um, a form which makes of what would otherwise be utterly indeterminate prime matter some determinate concrete thing of a certain kind is a substantial form. A form which merely modifies some secondary matter is an accidental form. A corporeal substance is, to state things more precisely, a composite of prime matter and substantial form. Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. Yeah, that's pretty epic. So remember the matter that we referred to, substantial form can be said to modify prime matter, which we saw doesn't actually exist, but can be thought of in theory. So substantial form modifies prime matter, and accidental form modifies secondary matter, which, as we saw above, was um, matter attached with some sort of um, a matter attached to something else rather than you know yeah, matter without a form, basically, no matter with a form rather than prime matter which doesn't have a form. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit today, but hopefully this will get clear. um Now, a specifically Thomistic interpretation of what's going on emphasizes something else that is known as the unicity of being. This is the idea that a substance can have only one substantial form at a time. There are two ways of seeing this. First of all, if you take three forms, only one of those forms can be a substantial form, since two substantial forms would relate to one another as accidental forms do, i.e., the same thing can't have two substances since only accidental forms can modify substantial forms and not other substantial forms. Remember, substantial forms modify prime matter, not secondary matter, which in turn modifies um, the substantial or substance. Sorry. All right. Um, yeah, thank you guys for bearing with me on this. This has been a little bit of a choppy episode, but okay. So the second way of seeing this is to look at the mechanism of matter and form. Prime matter exists only potentially, and if actualized by some substantial form, becomes secondary matter, that is, matter mixed with potency. Secondary matter, however, is already in some way actual, meaning that since substantial form only acts upon prime matter, it can't act upon secondary matter, just what I just said. The matter that was actualized by the substantial form can only be modified further by accidental form, since there is no prime matter anymore to act upon. Um, yeah, so that's exactly what I was saying about how, why there can, well, I guess there's a interpretation why there can only be one substantial form. Now, I learned about form and matter like a few years ago, and I was very confused about what some of those meant until like very recently, actually, when I picked up and started reading Bejer's Aristotle's Revenge. And he has this really illuminating quote which kind of cleared it up for me. So I would like to uh, like introduce that and just see if it helps you guys as it helped me, because yeah, this stuff is, you got to look at this stuff from a bunch of different angles before you can really grasp what's going on. All right, so the quote is, beginning quote, "The basic idea is that it seems to be essential to a thing's having a substantial form that it has properties and causal powers that are irreducible to those of its parts. Hence, water has properties and causal powers that hydrogen and oxygen do not have. Remember, water is made up of H2O, so two hydrogen, one oxygen. When water is synthesized out of hydrogen and oxygen, what happens is that the prime matter underlying the hydrogen and oxygen loses the substantial forms of hydrogen and oxygen and takes on a new substantial form, namely that of water. But the lesson we should draw from these considerations, according to the Thomist, is that hydrogen and oxygen do not exist actually in water, but only virtually. Notice that the claim is not that they don't exist in water at all. It is rather that they don't exist in water in the way that they exist when they exist on their own. Now, this too might sound odd. Consider that if hydrogen and oxygen were actually present in the water, then they should possess their characteristic properties and powers. That means that we should be able to burn the hydrogen and to boil the oxygen at negative 183 Celsius, but we cannot do either. Hence, the substantial forms of hydrogen and oxygen cannot be present, in which case the substances hydrogen and oxygen cannot be present. So that is just kind of, that's mind blowing. When two substantial forms like that come together, they lose both of their substantial forms and take on a new substantial form, which is different from the both of them. And that's pretty amazing. That's pretty cool. So we can now say that a true substance, when it is in its normal and mature state, is one whose tendencies are irreducible to its parts, and that this is the definition of hydromorphism. So irreducible to its parts, that just means that you can't split water into hydrogen and oxygen because those substances do not exist in the same way as they do on their own. So once you get down to water, like there's no way to further divide water. Um, so going down to the um, they're trying to reduce that further is then impossible. So water would be the water would be an example of hydromorphism here, which is the union of form and matter. All right, we now know the metaphysical backing for hydromorphism, and hopefully the water example clears up just about everything, but there is one more part of the definition to be considered, and that is the phrase, what is in its normal and mature state. So this just means that there are attributes which flow from being a true substance. For example, having four legs flows from the substance of dogginess. That is, dogginess begets the property of four-leggedness. What about maned or three-legged dogs, though? Are they not dogs because they don't have four legs? No, these would still be considered to have the substance of dogginess, but it would be dogginess in a defective state. So thus to determine which properties flow from which substances, we need to consider the paradigm case, and that's what the phrase, when it is in its normal and mature state means. So, in conclusion, then, we saw from the last podcast how form and matter are special cases of act and potency, respectively, meant to better explain the material world. We learned about the distinction between prime matter, which is matter without form, and an accidental matter, which is matter mixed with form, or secondary matter, I think it's called, as well as the distinction between substantial form, which exists in itself and actualizes prime matter, and accidental form, which adheres on the substantial form and actualizes secondary matter. Um, yeah, that's the most precise way of putting it. But yeah, I hope that was explained sufficiently enough in the before this. All right, so moving on with the conclusion then, we saw further how these definitions led us to a proper understanding of hylomorphism, which is substantial form acting upon prime matter. The substance created under this view is irreducible to further parts, as we saw with the example of hydrogen and oxygen in water. Finally, we learned about the specifically Thomistic doctrine of unicity of being, which argues that there can be only one substantial form for any given thing, and about how certain properties flow from different substances. All right, so this was kind of a lot. We covered form and matter in the past podcast, and this is kind of like the follow-up to it. Um, I think that's pretty much all Phaser has to say on it. I don't remember which section is going to be coming next, but I know we're going to be moving on to something besides matter and form. So hopefully these two videos should give you a pretty good idea of what those are and what hylomorphism is. But yeah, if they don't, then yeah, sorry, just take your time over it, or and if it still doesn't work there, then just feel free to comment, and I can go a little slower for next time.